Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an early impression video. For our second review of 2025, we're going to talk about a Prin fragrance. And today we're going to discuss a fragrance called Loup, which is a limited edition fragrance that came out in 2023. But first, real quick, scent of the day. Yesterday I reviewed a fragrance from Frederic Malle called Une Rose, or they changed the name in 2021. Came out in 2003. It was called Une Rose all the way out to 2021, in which case they changed it to Rose Tenere, which basically means like thunder rose. So Une Rose was like a rose, and then Rose Tenere was a thunder rose. And the perfumer was a gentleman named Edward Fleischier, who is one of my all-time favorite fragrance creators. And he created one of my favorite leather fragrances of all time. This was my scent of the day today. It's called Etro's Gomma. This is the original bottle. If you look on the back, you can actually see it says copyright 1988. And you can see the short ingredient list right here. But this is absolutely fantastic stuff. Oh my God, I wore it to work today. Loved every single second of it. Literally one of my favorite leathers of all time. I've got a backup bottle as well. But if you are into the kind of leather fragrances that I'm into, Gomma is a must sniff. I believe it's sadly discontinued right now. Etro made some really underrated fragrances back in the day. I heard they just got sold to one of the big conglomerate brands too, which makes me really, really sad. But these old Etro fragrances are worth their weight in gold. Okay, so let me do a fresh application of Loup by Prin Parfums, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. I'm going to give you the quick note listing rundown, but oh my God, look at that. All right, I'm now doused in Loup, and it got on my desk, so that'll probably smell for the next week or so. Let me let me just wipe that off, because otherwise I'll be smelling Loup forever. Okay, so let me read you the quick note listing, and then we'll go through some of this. So you have Oud from Laos, Oud from Malaysia, Hay Absolute, Tobacco Absolute, Guardian Balsam, Lavender Absolute, Himalayan Amber Fossil, Himalayan Amber, Thai Oud, Castoreum Patchouli, Amiris, Cumin Seed, Labdanum Clove, Black Pepper, Jasmine Absolute, Benzoin, and a camphor note. So continuing, second review of 2025, we're going to talk about this Prin fragrance, which is a limited edition. And Prin releases, it's funny because, you know, it's one of those houses that is not for me. It's not my favorite artisanal house. In fact, I own 0 bottles. Even though I've done a ton of work with the house, I've reviewed 12 of their fragrances already on the channel. I've done a lot of effort and time spent on the House of Prin, but quite frankly, it's just kind of one of those houses that I just do not get along with, okay? I would rank it in that second or third tier in the artisanal space, below the Ensars, the Aries Ladores, the Sherwoods, you know, all that stuff. I don't own a single full bottle from the house, as I've said, and they're kind of one of those brands where it's like when I do these early impressions like this, I think they're fun to get to know. But at the same time, it's kind of like one of those things. It's fun because it's crazy. You know, it's like Prin's like a mad scientist sometimes, and you just have no clue where he's going to go. But I'm starting to kind of pick up trends in his work, you know? And even if I had $420 or whatever this goes for 30 mils, which is crazy. Very, very steep asking price for a juice like this. Especially nowadays where I think the artisanal house pool is becoming more and more crowded with competition. And the competition is becoming much more intense, fighting for a limited pool of dollars that people are willing to spend in the artisanal space, right? So $420 for 30 mils, very, very steep asking price. I wouldn't buy this, you know. It's not the kind of fragrance where even if I had the money just burning a hole in my pocket, I would spend it somewhere else. You know, there's so many other vintage fragrances or other artisanal fragrances that I would go for before I spent $420 on something like this. But my first thought is that this is one of those Prin fragrances where if you blindfolded me and said, what is this? You know, instantly I think I could pick out this is a Prin. It has that sort of Prin Lomros DNA in the opening. And even though you get these little hints here and there of some things that you don't always smell in some of his releases, like the lavender, you know, I know Prakar Gupta of Sherwood loves using lavender. Prin Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. There's a little bit of these little touches here and there that just make it a slightly different, but the opening is an overdose of this unbalanced use of spices that is a pure Prin Lomros giveaway, in my opinion. Right from the opening, when you first put this on, you get oud and this very unbalanced sort of spice kit that he has created. And if you watch many of my early Prin fragrances, I am extremely offended by this combination of spices he uses and animalics. And here you have the castoreum, you have this sort of camphoraceous-like feel from some of the green notes, and you've got tobacco and amber and all this stuff, but it opens up smelling like a Prin fragrance with that very strong spice opening that many of my early Prin reviews, if I would have smelled this, I think a couple years ago, I would have been like, this is absolutely disgusting. You know, I hate it. My gut feeling is that I've become a little bit accustomed to what is coming. I'm not as easily shocked by what he ends up putting in his opening. It's much harder to offend me. And I have a huge tolerance for animalics, way higher than the average bear. You know, Ram has a huge tolerance for animalics. And so when I put these Prin fragrances on, I steady myself, get a good base, and get ready, because I know what's coming, you know. And the opening is exactly as you would expect. You know, Prin likes using these shock value type openings where it gets a little bit repetitive for me, because I feel like he tries to create these fragrances where he kind of wants everyone to applaud and go, yes, you're a brilliant creator, Prin, for creating something so challenging and out there, you know, like it should be in a museum or something. But that repetitiveness is getting a little bit boring for me. And I think when I read the blurb, I think it would be much easier for me to kind of accept the blurb, which I'll read to you when we're done going kind of through my thoughts. But if it didn't smell like so many of his other releases in the beginning, that's my first thought. Now, I've worn Loup twice, okay? This is the second time that I've had a chance to kind of put it on. I've got a longer dry down here of 4-ish hours. And then I just did that fresh application when I started the video. This fresh application has this sort of Prin DNA through and through. The dry down starts to go in a little bit different direction, but I think I'm at the point where the opening, that shock value opening that I feel like he is so in love with because he does it over and over and over again, it begins to get monotonous and mundane, you know? Very repetitive in that opening. Much of his work going for that early shock value, I feel like he needs to go a different route in the opening, you know? But with Loup, for whatever reason, either the animalic opening has been toned down a little bit compared to the way he sort of used animalics previously, or it's just kind of at that point where I've smelled so much of the way he tries to do the openings on these that it just doesn't shock me personally anymore. But I don't get that, you know, cat turd pulled out of the litter box and blended into his fragrances, or, you know, 15-year-old dog breath where all his teeth are rotted out, and, you know, that sort of dog breath smell bottled and blended into his fragrances like I got on some of the very early Prin releases that I got. So for whatever reason, I don't know why, but the opening, even though I feel like he is going for shock value, it doesn't strike me as challenging, if that makes sense. And so it's actually really hard to describe many of Prin's releases, in my opinion, because what ends up happening is his fragrances don't have this traditional pyramid where you kind of get this like top, middle, and base. They just don't. They kind of, all of the notes like fly at you at once with Prin's fragrances. And I've found many of his fragrances seem to just hurl themselves at you full speed, you know, and just bang against your nose. And whatever you can get, you can get. And so that's why I try to wear something at least 2 times, even before I do these early impression videos, which obviously, you know, I don't own a bottle. I probably will never own a bottle, but I do think there's still value in doing these reviews. So you kind of have my thoughts out there. And that's what I want the channel to be. I want the channel to be a little bit of an encyclopedia of fragrances where you can kind of get my thoughts, even on these very hard to find. In fact, even more so on these hard to find fragrances. Everyone out there is so quick to put the new Dior Homme videos up because that's going to get all the big views. I don't care about that. You know, I want to do these fragrances that are off the beaten path. I enjoy taking the channel in directions like this. And so what ends up happening is if you don't have experience with artisanal fragrances that use real oud, but specifically Prin's work, because his work is really, set aside from what other artisanal houses are doing. If you've never smelled some of Prin's previous work, you're just going to find this opening just weird and strange, and it may really put you off. This combination of ouds, spices, and animalic notes. But specifically, what shocked me with Loup, what I was not expecting, is that once you really get to like the 20-minute mark, and it's already starting, you know, that opening as I was first talking in the first 5 minutes or so after applying, it's that just traditional Prin, aggressive, you know, heavy-handed overdose of spices that seems very unbalanced. But strangely, as the minutes tick by, already it's starting to soften a little bit. And this is where Loup surprised me a little bit compared to some of his other work, because yes, it has that unbalanced spice combination where it feels like, you know, he created this spice kit of pepper and clove and cumin and these camphoraceous type notes, put it in the pot with some balsamic notes, and when he went to go sprinkle it all in, what he ended up doing was, instead of just sprinkling in a little bit, he sprinkled in it so hard where the cap fell off and the whole thing just fell into the pot, you know? And instead of actually putting that pot aside and starting over, what he decided to do was just go, whatever, they'll love it, and just continue creating. That's what it feels like when you smell some of these unbalanced sort of spice openings, where the cap just came off and he just dumped the whole thing in there. You know, that's what comes to mind when I smell his work. And then it's like he decided to just push forward and use it anyway, kind of thing, you know? He just shrugs and says, they'll think I did it on purpose. Fuck it, you know? So that's always how his spice kits feel to me. But with Loup, that unbalanced feeling lasts approximately 20 minutes. Even now, you know, we're 12 minutes in almost. It's starting to feel strangely like it's starting to come together, you know? Like he actually did do it on purpose. It wasn't just a mad scientist side of things with this one. And pretty soon it starts to smooth itself out, okay? And what I think is doing that smoothing out is this very interesting amber accord. So here, I've got a 4-hour dry down here. That amber accord is beautiful, okay? And I don't think I've smelled a Prin fragrance that uses an amber accord like that. Shockingly beautiful amber accord that starts to come through. Now, in the copy, in the blurb I'm going to read you here in a little bit, they say that the amber is like the shining golden eyes of the lone wolf, you know, as it traverses its habitat. Because this lone wolf is basically what the scent is based around. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But here, maybe more than any other Prin fragrance I've smelled, I really like this amber accord he created. It's sort of like softens out his overly harsh style. You know, Prin has this very aggressive, harsh, unbalanced style. And for me, I think this amber accord that he uses sort of rounds everything out, you know? It takes some of his heavy-handed use of the spices and the animalics, which I normally love, but just the way Prin puts those notes together, it's almost like Jack jumping out of his box at you, you know, this Jack in the Box surprise. And it makes the fragrance, the amber, makes the fragrance seem a touch more stealthy, you know, definitely more wearable. Most Prin fragrances I find extremely unwearable, and not just for a little bit, but for like 4 hours on, you know. This one, for whatever reason, the animalic notes don't seem as aggressive, and they don't seem to last as long, so it becomes much more wearable than most of the science project like fragrances I've reviewed on the channel. And when I do these Prin reviews, you know, I've sort of come to learn that with Prin, his fragrances fall into a couple categories. So one, he goes for this hardcore shock value, right? And that's my least favorite type of Prin fragrance. The where it just seems like he just wants to sort of just like sucker punch you, you know, with these animalic notes, right? The other Prin fragrances, which I've reviewed, include things like Mora and stuff like that. I think Mogao was another one, if I recall. There's just so many names. They're very hard to remember. But go watch some of my previous Prin reviews, and you'll find he does a second type of fragrance where he completely abandons this whole "we're going to shock you" type opening, and he focuses more on creativity in those type of fragrances. I think Mora was the one I really liked. where that was the Beautiful Sheepra, if I recall correctly. But I reviewed it on the channel. But what makes Loup so strange is it's like this strange intersection of those two sort of competing ideas, okay? And I've never come across a Prin release like that for me before. Most of his fragrances are cut and dry, either hates or loves, you know? And so for me, the fragrance opened up, and I was ready to put it into that very first category. I was ready to put it into that shock value animalic category, but it very quickly goes on a course correction, and that amber accord tames the wild spirit inside, if you will, keeping it in Wolf's terms. So even though the copy of the fragrance goes on and on about untamed wilderness and being wild and free and all of this stuff, you know, there is a taming of Loup that starts to come through. And at least to my nose, that sort of spicy animalic opening, if you give it 20 or 30 minutes, it might surprise you because it really starts to become tame, okay? This is a much more tame wolf than the copy will make it seem. Now, probably 20 minutes in is where the amber starts to shine. 30 to 40 minutes in, that's really where this smoky like oud incense note starts to come forward. And it has a bit of this almost like charcoal-like smokiness that starts to come through. And I think that is coming from the Malaysia oud. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's from the Malaysian oud. And along with that, there are these sort of strange hints of green touches that start to come forward to your nose. And so it's nowhere near as green as something like Oud Taiwan, or something along those lines where it's a real super green oud. But there are just little hints and bits and pieces here and there where, you know, you get these fragments of greenery, if you will. And so it's almost like while traversing his habitat, the forest, the wolf gets these little green leaves and weeds, you know, stuck in his fur and stuff like that as he's kind of going along. And so you get this slight green residue that comes to your nose here and there, but nothing just howls green at you. You know, it's not like this hardcore in-your-face green, in my opinion. So I recently reviewed a fragrance with a very prominent note of Hay Absolute, okay, from the brand called Aton. And it's called Oud Callistus. I reviewed it in the last week or two on the channel. You can check it out. But this also uses a Hay Absolute. But it's actually, the Hay Absolute is much better blended than in the Aton, which is strange to say that about a Prin fragrance, but it's true. And it mixes in this smoky sort of tobacco and hay, and then that smoky incensey oud starts to come along, and it mixes with the Thai oud. Now, the Thai oud, as a Thai perfumer, Prin loves using Thai oud. See it over and over again in his releases, and they add little hints of fruits. Thai oud is a very fruity, very jovial oud, you know? It's not like the hardcore animalic Indian ouds, barnyardy, anything like that. So Thai oud adds these little touches here. And I get little touches of things like plum, berries, maybe even the slight blueberry touch, and this slight, like, sweet jamminess. You know, if you can imagine, like, blueberry jam or something like that, berry jam, plum jam, gives a slight jamminess to the fragrance. And Thai oud can sometimes come across as very rubbery, but here, the oud is nowhere near as rubbery as in something like, he did a fragrance called Thachilla. Thachilla was a Thai oud dominant fragrance, and that came across as very rubbery, very like, you know, balloon-like, you know, rubbery and balloon-like. And I reviewed that one on the channel as well if you want to check it out. I really did like Thachilla, though. I would own a bottle of Thachilla if money was no issue. The Thai oud in there was very, very interesting. But here, there's maybe a very slight hint of a rubber note, but it's nothing like you're smelling a tire or anything like that. I don't want you to be worried of like a tire fire or anything in the forest. Nothing like that. So the combination of this slight smokiness from the incense, which is very, you know, Zen-like, very temple, you know, like the wolf running through ancient temples in this this desolate land that this lone wolf is running through. So you get this combination of this smoke from the oud, and I think smoke from that dried hay, which gives off this very, like, you know, imagine like brittle straw breaking. So you get hay and tobacco combination. It creates this feeling of earthiness and also this deserted, empty, barren landscape, you know, and that's what Prin was going for, I think. So imagine like the smoke is like the two football teams run onto the field for the big game, you know? Now apply that to the wolf traversing his forest with lots of earthy oud and camphoraceous touches and the remnants of this unbalanced spice kit that all of a sudden seem to become balanced and come into focus as the hours tick by. With this amber that's very, very prominent, the amber starts to become more and more prominent, and it starts to kind of take control a little bit, and it smooths everything out. The amber smooths everything out beautifully, you know, like taking a scalpel and just sort of smoothing out the paint or something. So I do feel like the higher quality ingredients that are used here are allowed to shine more into the dry down. So the opening gives no indication that this is worth double or sometimes more than double what the average Prin fragrance goes for. $420 or whatever it is for 30 mils is steep, very, very steep. But later on, as you get into the dry down, that's where it does feel like some of those higher quality materials are allowed to shine a little bit. Because the opening gives no indication that you get any value for money over just the average Prin fragrance. But later on, the golden shining eye metaphor of the amber comes through, the smoke rising off the ground, you know, and that's coming from some of the higher quality ouds, the forest floor that the wolf is walking on, the animalic ingredients used, the castoreum absolute, and all that stuff creates this image of the wolf, you know, using castoreum, the animalic ingredients. And I guess for whatever reason with Prin, when he creates a fragrance around a wolf, he did one that I reviewed on the channel called Veruc. That was also a wolf-based fragrance, and I really, really liked that. Shockingly liked it. In fact, I was trying to figure out why I liked it so much, because I was like, you know, he's using a lot of animalic ingredients, but for some reason it just works with Veruc. So for whatever reason, when it comes to a wolf fragrance for Prin, he happens to hit it on the head. And here, you know, he, along with Veruc, created what I think is a really good fragrance. And I feel he matured with Veruc. I feel like Veruc was like, I could see the maturity from some of the earlier releases that I reviewed on the channel from 21, 22. Now Veruc, I think, was one of his 2023 releases. I believe this is also a 2023 release. And so, you know, with Loup, I got that kind of pit in my stomach where I was like, oh no, here we go, down the same old Prin part in the opening. But it does this very strange course correction. And I guess I have to eat my words, because many times I said with Prin fragrances that his fragrances are either love or hate. There's no middle ground with Prin, you know? But with Loup, it's one of the only Prins I've ever come across where I really did not like the opening, and I was ready to put it in the hate category. But it sort of does that course correct into the dry down, where you smell the higher quality ingredients, the story comes together, the fragrance comes together, it just gels together, you know? Like a wolf pack coming together. But maybe this kind of shows his growth as a perfumer as well. I don't know. But both two wolf fragrances, both feel like he spent considerable time and effort on them. You know, a lot of times my beef with his fragrances are that they feel very mad scientist-y, that it feels like he took some ingredients, threw them together, and said, here's a fragrance, bitches, enjoy it, you know? And some people applaud that, and others are like, boo, you know? But here it really feels like he took time to make the fragrance as one like cohesive whole. And I don't always feel that with Prin fragrances. So let me read you the blurb in closing, because it's actually a pretty interesting blurb and it's not too long. So on the Prin website, it is out of stock. It might still be available on Lucky Scent or something like that if you're interested. I don't know how many bottles were made, but here, let me read you the blurb. So, story of a lone wolf wandering in the wild under the full moon at the end of the world. Smoky, spicy, animalic, amber, and oud, in the depths of desolate land where civilization had long vanished and nature reigned supreme, there roamed a lone wolf. Its silvery fur shimmered under the pale glow of the full moon, casting an ethereal radiance upon the barren landscape. This magnificent creature had chosen a life of solitude, venturing deep into the wilderness that stretched to the ends of the world. As the night descended, the air grew heavy with a mystical aura, and the scent of smoky spices permeated the atmosphere. It was as if the very essence of the wild had intertwined with the wolf's spirit, creating an intoxicating fragrance that could be sensed from afar. A blend of green, earthy Malaysian oud and rich, smoky amber fossil and hay absolute wafted through the air, creating a tapestry of captivating aromas. The lone wolf navigated the rugged terrain with grace and purpose, its keen senses guiding its path. It moved with the quiet confidence of a creature at home in the untamed wilderness. Its eyes, a piercing shade of amber, gleamed with a fierce determination, reflecting the wild and untamed spirit that resided within. With every step, the wolf left behind footprints that seemed to vanish into the unknown, as if it were a fleeting visitor from another realm. The night echoed with the haunting calls of distant creatures, a symphony of nature's harmonies that accompanied the wolf on its journey. As the moon reached its zenith, casting an otherworldly glow upon the land, the lone wolf stood atop a rugged cliff, overlooking a world untouched by human presence. It howled into the night, a melancholic melody that blended with the wind and echoed into the vastness of the unknown. Its voice carried the stories of ancient times, the legend of a forgotten era. At that moment, the smoky, spicy, animalic scent of the wolf's presence merged with the fragrance of the untamed wilderness. The allure of amber and oud, deep and mysterious, surrounded the lone wolf like an olfactory cloak, embodying its solitary existence in a world on the brink of oblivion. The lone wolf continued its endless wanderings under the full moon, forever carrying the scent of the wild and the memories of a world long lost. It became a symbol of resilience, independence, and untamed freedom, an embodiment of the smoky, spicy, animalic amber and oud that lingered in the air, forever etching its story into the fabric of the forgotten lands, the time of the wolf. So that's the blurb. As I said, when I first smelled the opening, that blurb made me go, man, that just sounds like a bunch of BS, because this smells like many, many of his openings. But later on, as it kind of all came together, the blurb made a little bit more sense. I still don't know if I would make the connection with a wolf without the actual blurb. But needless to say, I like some of the, images and hypotheses they put forward for the way that the scent breaks down, like the amber for the eyes and stuff like that. The floor the wolf walks on, the smoke rising, all that stuff, the howling at the moon. So strangely, a Prin that started off as a dislike turned into a pretty decent like. I really like the dry down. Would I pay $420 for this? Hell no. Not in a million billion years would I pay $420 for this. But I really enjoyed getting to know it. So if you have any experience with Prin's Loup or his work in general, do let me know. Glad to get to do a second review so soon in 2025. Hope you all have a great start to the year. There will be more reviews to come, God willing. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.